Muchas gracias.
Thank you very
Muy
much.
buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, everyone.
En primer lugar,
First of
quiero
all,
expresar un saludo
I want to
de parte del
send
presidente de
the regards from the President of Guatemala, Otto Pérez Molina, because of several very important reasons. He is unable to be here today. He's not able to be here in this event, which is extremely important for all of us. So I am here with a delegation, and I have the Minister for the Economy, Sergio de la Torre, the Minister of Energy and Mines, and it is also a great pleasure to have the Guatemalan ambassador to the UK here with us. I would also like to send my regards to Sarah Dixon, the UK ambassador to Guatemala. She's very dynamic, and she's very worried about the bilateral agenda between Guatemala and the United Kingdom. And we never have much time, but I would like to give you a short introduction so that we're all aware of the context. First of all, it's important to say that when you look at the map, Guatemala has a very important privilege geostrategic position. We are next to what is the biggest market in the world. We are also in a position in which we have an access to both oceans. We have a border of about 1,000 kilometers with our sister country in the north, Mexico. We also have a border with El Salvador and Honduras, and we also share a geographical area with Belize. So it's very important for us when we're talking about security that in countries such as the Central America countries, these countries that are coming out of a transition, as it was mentioned beforehand in the introduction, we had internal armed conflict that lasted for many, many years. And the first challenge is to build strong institutions. And that these institutions have agendas that go beyond the 4 years of government. The Latin American countries are very involved in politics, and there are a lot of political battles during electoral campaigns. And when we have new emerging democratic countries, the main challenge is often to have strong institutions, as it should be, after a time of internal conflict and authoritarian regimes. The first big step and the first big challenge is to find out how to have values that have to do with authority, respecting and complying with the law, and also defending a democratic state. After all these battles, armed battles and battle between ideologies, what we're left with is with a deep discussion in order to find out how we can have a modern state, a democratic government, to build a rule of law, a democratic rule of law, in order to face the new challenges of security beyond the framework of the East-West conflict and all these issues of the Cold War that had to do with Central America. So it is quite difficult to find all these democratic values, to build them when we're coming with all this past of conflict that has affected the entire society. And we have a reality, and to see all this together is extremely important for us. When we're talking about security, we want to leave behind the certain old things that had to do with old values of defense. We cannot think in traditional terms when we're talking about defense. We are not have the threat of armed intervention or problems to our sovereignty. yes, the sovereignty of the state is threatened when we're looking about compliance with the law, but the threats are completely different to the threats we were facing in the past. In countries such as Guatemala, there are internal factors that carry out security problems for us. And sometimes we can see a total lack of governance because we are in a transition, but also because we are in a geostrategic position. This is also a geographic situation that some people take advantage of. Those who don't recognize any borders, those who are involved in transnational organized crime. Sometimes there are problems between countries in order to try to have a regional effort, but criminals don't have these problems. They use them. They use the borders and the divisions in order to be able to organize all their criminal activities in the area, and this has a very strong impact in the different countries. An internal security problem for us nowadays is the weakness that we have with the rule of law, the fight against impunity, controlling the main insecurity factors and criminal factors that have to do with organized crime, and we have to highlight the issue of drug trafficking. When we look at a regional perspective, organized crime and mainly drug trafficking is the main threat for us. And when we try to think about the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities that we have to have strong institutions, democratic institutions that will guarantee the minimal aspects of security. This is something very important. And in that sense, being able to define not only the policies and the strategies, but also the entire judicial system that will give us the tools to fight against organized crime is essential. We must not deny that with the framework of insecurity and endemic violence that we have in a region such as Central America, one of the very important factors that has to do with how this situation is growing are the social inequalities that we have in the area. The fight against poverty is therefore extremely important. If people don't have alternatives, if they have no jobs, if there is no investment, if there is no hope of having a good life, for all citizens to have a good life, then organized crime and crime in general finds this very fertile land in which it can grow. And there is what we have, the most important part of our society is young people. And nowadays, from a very young age, young people start to participate in crime, and they start to be in gangs that also have a transnational aspect. I'm talking about two specific gangs. They were very famous at the very beginning in the United States, and it came from political refugees that went to the USA, and then they were sent back to Central America, mainly to El Salvador. So Mara Salvatrucha is one of the main gangs, or the Barrio 18 gang are two gangs that carry out many activities. And we're not just talking about young people dealing with gangs that do petty crime. We're talking about criminal structure, criminal groups in which we have many minors, people under 18, but who are as strong as the mafias that we know nowadays. Guatemala, south of Mexico, Tabasco, Chiapas, El Salvador, Honduras, all these countries. In all these countries, we have this problem with these transnational gangs. If you go to see the FBI webpage, you will find a task force that is set to tackle the problem that these two gangs are creating in the USA, in many, many cities in the United States. It's become an extremely difficult problem to tackle. So when we look at all this panorama, having strong institutions is very important. Which positive and negative aspects do we have when we're trying to have new policies? or innovative policies, Guatemala nowadays have an international commission against impunity in Guatemala. Is an experiment from the United Nations, and it has carried out real results, not only in the fight against impunity, but also in trying to have a judicial system that will give us the tools to fight against organized crime. Nowadays, being able to fight against money laundering and money laundering of other assets and all the crimes related to money laundering, and also to have activities when it comes to seizing certain assets is a very important tool that we have in our country. Cecile, this entity has been essential for this. When we look at the weaknesses, well, we have been building strong institutions in order to face this kind of threats, and we still have a long time to go, a long way to go. We are building these strong institutions. We have a clear idea of what we have to do and how to achieve it, and we believe that when we look at the framework of major challenges, not only of security in Guatemala, but in the entire region, cooperation with bilateral agendas and also creating a regional agenda is extremely important. And I just want to finish this point by saying that we have a work dynamic that has to do with generating synergies, positive synergies for cooperation. With Mexico, we already have created a group that works bilaterally in several areas. We're not just talking about work at a border level, but a transnational work in security. So we participate in this group, we share information, and it's a permanent working group that has to do with policing issues, intelligence, immigration, coordination between the different borders, and also border crossings. And this has allowed us to have a transnational agenda that has worked very well. And we would like to duplicate that model with El Salvador, with Honduras, and with Belize. This is part of our main regional strategy to work all together and in order to be able to tackle organized crime in a much more effective way. The major challenge, and this is the conclusion of my first part, has to do with organized crime, and mainly when we look at drug trafficking and all activities related to drug trafficking. And we are looking at all the stages involved in this. And what we have been saying is that we want to be recognized because traditionally drug trafficking is seen in two scenarios. First, we have the supply and the demand, but we have a third one. We have the one in between. We have transit, all those countries through which you have all the trafficking of drugs going from the supply to the demand. And in that sense, this has to do with the consequences of the protection of both supply and demand. So there's more traffic of weapons, money. So the drugs go from south to north, and from north to south we have the money, we have the weapons. There is the fight for territory, for controlling this traffic, and to see who will be helping the cartels in the south or in the north. And all this involves the transit countries going from Panama to Guatemala. This involves these countries in a war that is not our war. It's not, we didn't decide to do it, and we don't think we should fight this war. And this is extremely unfair because then there is not a shared responsibility, because we see at we look at the resources that have to do tackling supply and demand. Our countries have a great potential, but one of our main problems has to do with security. Nevertheless, because we are involved in this war on drugs, we have to use our own resources. We have very few resources that many times we don't even have, and that we would like to invest in health, in education, in trying to create better conditions for citizens, and we have to use all these resources for security reasons. If we don't do it, then we have, if we don't seize enough drugs, then we can have economic measures against us, and this will have to threaten our country. So we really think that we're in a position, and President Otto Perez has been defining regional strategies that have to do with this lack of balance, this asymmetry, this unfairness of being forced to participate in this war, and this war that we're not ready for. And thirdly, as well, that we have to start to find new lines of action that are more effective than what we've seen so far. So in a few words, creating strong institutions, having a clear vision at a regional level is very important. We cannot work in an isolated matter. We have to define policies together, and we need to have regional dynamics. And this could be the starting point for a very joint work altogether. And now more than ever, we're talking about prevention, because we're always doing the opposite. We've always looked at repression, reaction, but we've talked very little about prevention in this area, and we think this is essential. And to conclude, I would just like to say that the main challenge is to change this paradigm of security in the region. We have to think about prevention and not about reaction, and we have to look at this in all areas of activity, and we think this is a starting point for a new dynamic in changing the security paradigm.